in an effort to demonise Israel, describing it as disinformation. He says Israel is caught between the anvil of jihadism on its border and the hammers of global hatred. He argues that the country is fighting a defensive war it did not seek. Well, amid escalating global tensions, the government says that it will boost the Royal Navy's defences with a £405 million upgrade. Missiles that have been used to defend commercial ships from attacks in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the most capable naval air defence system ever developed for the Royal Navy. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GBNews a few moments ago that Britain is taking the lead.
We're investing £288 billion over the next decade to make sure that we do pump more money into our military, into our equipment, and that we can safely defend ourselves. And Britain's leading the way, as I said, in Ukraine, but actually also this week I announced an operation in Europe called Steadfast Defender, which is a NATO operation, which the United Kingdom's providing 40% of the ground troops and 50% of the overall personnel, even though there were 32 countries in total involved in this. So we really are leading from the front in the UK.
Well, tax cuts could be on the way this spring as the Chancellor looks to relieve pressure on families. Ahead of the budget in March, Jeremy Hunt says the current tax relief is working as he pledged to stick to the government's plans. Economists estimate that he could be handed up to £10 billion by official forecasters next week, paving the way for cuts to some taxes in the spring. Well, as we've been hearing, detectives investigating the deaths of 4 people in Norfolk have now confirmed they're not looking for anyone else in connection with that incident. The bodies of 2 young girls, a 36-year-old woman and a 45-year-old man, were found in a house on Allen Bedford Crescent on Friday morning. It comes after Norfolk Police Force referred itself to the independent watchdog after failing to respond to a 999 call from a home where those 4 bodies were found. Post-mortem examinations are being carried out today. Tens of thousands of people are taking to the streets across Germany in protest against a right-wing political party. Marchers carrying banners saying against hate and defend democracy, among other banners, are gathering in more than 100 cities and towns across the country. It comes after reports revealed a secret meeting involving the popular Alternative Party for Germany, where it's alleged they discussed a plan to deport people from so-called non-German backgrounds, which would also include many German citizens. The party, known as AfD, is currently polling second in national surveys. Well, that's the latest from the GB Newsroom for now. I'll be back in the next hour. In the meantime, we're on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Now, though, let's head back to Michael.
Thank you, Sam Francis. Conservatives had a gloomy start to the week, clashing noisily over the Rwanda bill and dissecting the results of a comprehensive poll by YouGov. The multi-level regression and post-stratification model, or MRP for short, produces a supposedly more accurate survey that predicts results for each constituency. Whilst the national map continues to look blue, that's only because Conservatives with sparsely populated areas, whilst they're wiped out in urban zones where the constituencies are smaller in area. The poll suggests that an election would now result in an overall Labour majority of 120, with every Conservative gain in the red wall from 5 years ago returning to Sir Keir Starmer, as the Tories shed nearly 200 seats. What is the psychological damage to Conservative MPs? To consider that question, I have with me a top-class political panel. Gavin Rice is the project director of the Onward think tank's Future of Conservatism project. Reem Ibrahim is from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Dennis McShane is the former Europe Minister under Tony Blair. Welcome to all of you to GB News. Welcome back, I think, in every single case. Reem, what about the psychological damage to members of Parliament? Do you think some of them with this poll have woken up for the first time to the thought that their seat is going? I mean, I noticed, for example, that both Bournemouths are due to go. Both Worthings are due to go. I mean, these are extraordinary predicted results.
These are really extraordinary. And I think what's particularly interesting and what was particularly striking for me is the number of cabinet ministers that are looking to potentially lose their seat. We're talking about sunny Surrey with Jeremy Hunt's constituency. We're talking about Penny Mordaunt's constituency. A number of top-level cabinet ministers that potentially, would look to lead the party in some future for the Conservative Party. And actually, they are looking to lose their seat as well. I think that primarily the Conservative Party itself is looking at what went wrong, what has gone wrong over the last few years, what kind of ideological direction is the party going in. And actually, I think that there's been a huge amount of infighting within the party itself. So, of course, for many of those MPs, they sort of only have themselves to blame, and I think that they do.
I'd like to introduce some varied psychological factors. First of all, I don't think cabinet ministers are overly bothered whether they lose their seats or not. You say that these people would be in the position to lead the party after the election, but to lead a rump party of 169, I mean, that implies that the Conservatives will be out of office for more than a parliament, and anybody who fails to win at the following election ceases to be leader. So I don't think cabinet ministers are bothered. I think there are others who see that they're going to hold their seats, according to this prediction, who would be thinking, aha, in a much smaller party, I stand a much better chance of becoming leader or climbing the ranks. So actually, these are quite complicated psychological factors, I put to you.
I think what is true about that is that if the Conservative Party is not in government after the next election and they're able to undergo, I think, a new ideological direction, I do think that many of those MPs that will be sticking around actually think that they might be able to have an ideological influence on the party itself. There are so many different factions within the party, and we really have seen those splits occur. We cast our minds back to 2022 during the Conservative Party leadership election, where we were presented with two very different definitions of what conservatism actually means. I think that what's right about that is that many of those members of Parliament will be looking at the party and actually thinking, hold on a minute, we might be able to actually make a difference here.
Gavin, there's an implication in what Reem is saying, not explicitly stated, that a lot of MPs are actually thinking, right, we're going to be in opposition, and this is the moment to reshape the party, review the mistakes we've made, but also, I suspect in the minds of many of them, make it more what we want the party to be. So some of them will say, right, we're going to have a party that's properly constituted to resist illegal immigration, and others are saying, right, we're going to have a party that's properly constituted to win the middle ground. From this MRP YouGov survey, do we have any idea as to whether the party would, with the MPs who returned at the 169 seats, be more centrist or less centrist than today?
Well, Michael, I think it depends what you mean by centrist. The first thing I would say is that I don't think this is the first time that a lot of Conservative MPs are contemplating the possibility of losing the election. If you think back to the Truss-Kwarteng mini-budget, it was probably precisely that collapse in the polls that led to her defenestration in the first place. I think you're also absolutely right that people are now asking the question, what went wrong or what is continuing to go wrong, and what is the future of the party? According to the MRP, as you say, it looks as though a lot of the slimmer majorities, perhaps some of the 2019 acquisitions in the Midlands, the North East, and the Red Wall might be the first to go. We have done some analysis actually at the think tank I work for, Onward, on the views of MPs relative to the size of their parliamentary majority. And what we actually found is that there isn't really a correlation between an MP's economic views, so what they think about taxation, what they think about spending on public services, and how big their majority is. So I wouldn't expect a very heavy defeat, if that's what happens, necessarily to lead mathematically to a massive change in the economic position of the party. But I think what is true is that a lot of MPs that were elected in the Red Wall were elected on the back of Brexit and also on promises around reducing immigration as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out if, and I stress if, this eventuality does come to pass.
Yes, I think it would be great if you did some more work on this. I mean, I would think very crudely, the point you've already made, that the Red Wallers tended to be swept in on the Brexit vote, and they were strong Brexiteers themselves, whereas those who are going to survive, to the extent that they do in the southwest of England, the south of England, the southeast of England, these are people who are looking over their shoulders to Liberal Democrats. They very often, therefore, I say therefore, tend to be more centrist because they're aware of what they're fighting off in their constituents. They're aware that their constituents are on the middle ground. So I would very crudely suggest that the party is going to move towards a moderate position. I don't think economics matters so much in the Conservative Party anymore. I mean, they all claim to be tax cutters, of course.
They all claim to be, but they're not.
Taxes have never been higher. But what they are divided about are things like immigration, quite honestly. Let's stick with Gavin. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. I think that it depends what you mean by centrist. We've done a lot of public opinion research at Onward that shows that the average voter is slightly to the centre-left of the average MP, but probably socially to the right when it comes to issues around crime and law and order, around immigration and those kinds of questions. So I think if it is the case that due to a kind of narrow sort of political interest that the party seeks to pivot towards the Liberal Democrats, that might be in the interest of some specific campaigns in the South East, but I don't think that would be with the trend of where the general population would be, and I don't think that would assist the party's prospects going forward to elections in the future.
Dennis McShane, sorry to keep you waiting all this time. You have recently been skiing, and amongst those that you skied with, because you're a Liberal-minded fellow, were some Tory MPs, I believe. And how did you find their morale? I mean, apart from the fact that obviously you beat them on the slopes, how was their morale beyond that?
No, the Liz Truss was there, Daniel Haddam was there. It was an absolute kind of a devil's witch's brew of anti-Europeanism, but leaving that entirely to one side with Swiss colleagues, so it was mix and match. Very depressed. I just went up to lots of perfectly good Tory friends and said, "How are you feeling?" He said, "Oh, I've got a majority of 8,000. I'm out. I've got a majority of 10,000. I'm out." I've also, Michael, if I dare plug it again, Camilla Tominey's already done a very nice interview with me, just published my diaries for 1997 to 2001. And what was fascinating rereading them is that a big defeat like that does not make the party more moderate. It actually drives it into the hands of William Hague with his incredible hostility to Europe, then Ian Duncan Smith, Michael Howard. It took a full decade for the Tories to come back to some intelligence, just as Labour after 2010. It's taken us 13 years to get back into the game. So I think this could, if Labour has to play its cards well, I think with Sir Keir Starmer, he is so prudent, so middle of the road, so centrist, so cautious. That caution, prudence, centrism is actually where the bulk, I think, of the British people are. And I think it could be a long, long road back for the Tories.
I'm so glad you've mentioned prudence and caution, because I want to raise exactly the other point. You were in Tony Blair's government, and you know that Tony Blair, looking back, thinks that his greatest mistake was not to get on with things during the first Parliament. During his first Parliament of 3, he was so nervous, they just won the majority, was Labour going to win another majority, was it possible, that he more or less wasted that first term. I think Sir Keir Starmer is absolutely on course to waste his first term because of his caution and prudence. I mean, this poll tells him he's going to win. Why doesn't he ease up a bit and offer us some radical changes rather than just managing his way through his first term?
Simply because, I mean, he wants, if you like, to win. He suffers, doesn't suffer, he's infected by the General Montgomery syndrome, a great military leader, but he always waited till he had a 10-to-1 majority. Then, surprise, surprise, he beat the Germans. And he was hailed as the greatest general since Hannibal or Napoleon. He was a very, very good general, but basically he built up. And you're right, I think, on Tony. I thought, for example, he's very cautious on Europe. Gordon Brown was in there with all of his team, very, very nervous, very blocking, very cautious. But it's a huge, huge risk. As they say, when you're confronted with the permanent undersecretaries, the head of the blob, and they say, "Yes, Minister, that's a very radical idea," and you just faint in terror.
The blob may well be longing for you. Gavin, a point that Dennis asked me off air before we came on. Do we think these MRP polls are more accurate, more reliable?
Well, I think the thing about an MRP poll is that it just shows a different thing. A regular opinion poll is a representative survey. You interview 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 5,000 people, and then it's scientifically weighted to reflect things like age and various other factors to make it representative of the population. An MRP poll is an advanced statistical technique to look at what's going on in each individual constituency. It's very difficult to go and ask the entire population and visit every constituency and poll everybody. So it's really a technique to find out what would happen if a particular question was asked across the country on a constituency basis.
Reem, overall, what is your reaction to this? I mean, you tend to be, I think, further to the right in the Conservative Party. Has this poll made you think differently, and how does it make you feel about the future of the Conservative Party?
Well, what it does do, I think, is I think this point that Gavin made earlier about the economics, and actually I think that within the Conservative Party, the economics has seemed to have taken a back footing. It seems as though, I mean, of course, we've got the highest tax burden since the Second World War. We've got huge amounts of red tape and regulation that the government don't seem too keen on getting rid of. And actually, post-Brexit, this idea behind sort of making Brexit work, and we've taken back control, but we've implemented negative policies that have effectively not meant that we've been able to do good things. There's no point taking back control and doing bad things with that newfound sovereignty. So I think that within the party, there's a huge number of questions about where the Conservative Party actually should be looking towards in the new direction. And I hope that is a more free market solution.
So, Reem summing up there with additional reasons why we shouldn't be voting Conservative, perhaps. Thank you very much. Dennis McShane, Reem Ibrahim and Gavin Rice. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo, Britain's news channel. After the break, I'll explore with expert Bara Shaban the inconsistencies in Britain's attitude to the Houthi rebels, who are now attacking shipping in the Red Sea.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Western forces, primarily those of the United States, have now carried out 5 rounds of airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen, who attack ships in the Red Sea with missiles, drones and boarding parties. But the history of the British government's attitude towards them is an unexpected one. To explore it, I'm joined by Yemeni expert analyst Barar Shayban from the Royal United Services Institute. Very nice to see you indeed. Let's begin to try to understand these Houthis. First of all, and I mean this very literally, what do they believe in?
So the Houthis is a theological movement. They believe in summary, they believe in the right or the divine right to rule for the Houthi family. This comes from it's part of a more complicated history in Yemen. But Yemen in 1962 became a republic, which for the founder of the Houthi movement, his father did not take with great joy, let's say. And that's why he didn't sit well with the idea of having a parliament with political parties, which Yemen kind of endorsed a plural political system post-1990. So the method of having a multi-party system inside Yemen did not sit with the Houthi family specifically, but then it coincided with the founder of the movement having this great, I would say, admiration towards the Islamic Revolution of Iran. So he shared with revolutionary Iran the vision of what do they see in the region, which is they want to disrupt what they believe is a US-led regional order. And that's why they have a lot of animosity towards specifically Israel and Saudi Arabia, being the biggest US partners in the region, which the US have kind of, for decades really have relied on to have a form of like, these are the main partners, and then the region kind of, settle around a form of arrangement between those two.
Does the conflict between Shia and Sunni play a part in this?
It plays a part, but that's not the main instigator. That's not the reason why they're fighting. The Houthis, I'd like to remind the public, in 2011, Yemen, like many Arab countries, had the Arab Spring, pro-democracy movement that went to the streets and calling for actual political changes and reform. The Houthis joined that initial protest, but then later on started to kind of not settle with, let's say, the calls for the young youth, the women, the activists who were calling for pro-democracy chants in the squares of Sana'a. So the reality is they started immediately after they took control over the capital. They launched a coup, which literally they blocked the political transition, which we had set to have elections, a referendum, because the idea is not within their political framework. That's not the political mindset of the Houthi movement, and that's why immediately when they took control over the capital, they banned political parties, they imprisoned journalists, they took hundreds of activists to prison. Civil society was banned, newspapers were banned from printing, and the move towards a more open political system that we witnessed in Sana'a post the Arab Spring quickly went the other direction.
You've mentioned what the political conditions are like under the Houthis, where they're in charge. What are the economic conditions like?
The Houthis, again, the Houthis is a military wing. They have, since their creation, they have this admiration towards Iran and Hezbollah being a military wing, but they have shown basically they can't govern. So under the Houthi control, they've tried to incorporate the establishment structure within their group. As a result, the governance structure in Sana'a had collapsed. So services are not being delivered. People don't know this, but even the public salaries in all Houthi-controlled areas haven't been paid since mid-2016. And that's made a lot of people, many people, angry. Actually, many people don't know this, but only a few days before the war in Gaza started, there were mass protests in Sana'a, in the cities that they control. And one way to avoid that, I would say, local dissent is if you create this enemy abroad. Try to distract the attention by actually, we are in part of a much bigger war right now, so it's not time for you to criticize, it's not time for you to call for your salaries, pay, deliver services and so on, because we are engaged in this war.
Classic technique. You list a series of very unattractive qualities as far as the West is concerned. Why then has Britain not had why has Britain not had a clear-cut and consistent view of the Houthis? And can you remind us of some of the diplomatic interventions that Britain has made in recent years?
Well, given that, I mean, I live in the UK. I'm British now, and I would say I cannot say, but I'm very disappointed in how Britain approached this whole thing since the beginning. They wanted the Yemeni to basically tolerate that actually it is fine to have basically Houthi control to a level. Not because I would say it's misintention. It's basically, some part of it is like they don't understand how the situation is. No one actually paid attention to what the Houthis are saying. Literally, their chant says, and I quote, "Death to America, death to Israel, damn on the Jews, and victory to Islam." Not a very, I would say, tolerant and promising slogan that actually is promising prosperous life for the Yemeni people. And if you want to translate this, just look at look at how their actions are on the ground. Even women have been imprisoned and tortured inside Houthi prisons. As we speak, next week they've scheduled a women's rights activist to a death penalty. So a very, very grim situation.
But under Jeremy Hunt as our Foreign Secretary, what was our attitude to the Houthis? What were we urging the Yemeni government and the Saudis to do at that time?
Unfortunately, in 2018, in the west coast of Yemen, that's in the coast, looking over the Red Sea, literally where these attacks are happening right now. Jeremy Hunt, the coalition, there was a military intervention that came very, very close to actually dislodging the Houthis from the whole west coast of Yemen. Unfortunately, Jeremy Hunt came in to intervene as part of a bigger diplomatic intervention to pressure the Yemeni government and the Saudis to halt the operation in order to broker something called the Stockholm Agreement. In short, they promised that both forces are going to redeploy from the important strategic port of Hodeidah, that's in the west coast of Yemen. Surprise, surprise, the Yemeni forces did redeploy, the Houthis didn't. When they wanted then to basically visit to attack again, because actually they were literally 4 kilometers away from the port of Hodeidah, Jeremy Hunt had to fly to the UAE and to Saudi Arabia, and then went into Aden to meet the Yemeni foreign minister. And he said on ITV, he delivered a very difficult message. Basically, he told them, you should not attack the port. I then revisited. I personally met the Yemeni former foreign minister. I asked him, and he said, if it wasn't for the British, we would have ended this a long, long time ago.
That is extraordinary. May I ask you about your personal history? You live in the United Kingdom, but you were forced out of Yemen.
Yes, unfortunately, yeah.
Tell me why. What do you believe would have happened to you if you'd remained in Sana'a?
I'll tell you the story of two of my fellow activists. They were two bright journalists who I met in the square. Immediately in 2015, they were arrested. And when the Saudi-led coalition airstrikes started, in order to make an example out of anyone who would oppose them, they took them and then they placed them inside a weapon depot, knowing that the Saudis are going to bomb them. And unfortunately, both of them died. This is just to make an example about anyone who would oppose them in the future. I have no doubt, it's not just me. Just look at the reports by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch. Any report would tell you how they've been treating their any form of dissent inside their areas.
Extraordinary. I've learned a lot from your testimony this morning. Thank you very much for coming on GB News and really informing us on the situation.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Bara Shayban. For those of us who enjoy being lost in the realm of the written word, it's a joy to discover a corner bookshop with teetering stacks of dusty volumes. There's good news, as independent bookshops are enjoying a resurgence. 51 new shops opened last year, up from 49 the year before. The Booksellers Association says there are now 1,063 independent stores in the United Kingdom, a marked rise from just 867 in 2016. To explore the pleasures and challenges of running an independent bookshop, I'm very pleased to be joined by three booksellers. John Pye runs the East Grinstead Bookshop. Cheryl Sherville is co-owner of Chorleywood Bookshop and Gerrard's Cross Bookshop as well. And Venetia Vivian has owned Barnes Bookshop since 2016, after working for 30 years at Haywood Hill Bookshop in Mayfair. So we have decades of book-selling experience. Vivian, let me begin with you, if I may. Tell me about the joys for you of running a bookshop.
Well, it gives you amazing power, really, to make the area that you work in and have called your own a better place.
What sort of things do you do, Vivian, to make your shop more attractive, to get people through the door?
Well, we don't just sell books, we sell toys and stationery. We are part of larger initiatives in Barnes. We founded the Barnes Book Festival 3 years ago. And we are also part of a reading group that has been set up by the Old Sorting Office, which is a theatre in Barnes.
John, are you finding that it is necessary to diversify what bookshops do, to open them up to the public for all sorts of purposes that go beyond browsing and buying books?
Well, I've been a bookseller now for 40 years. I find that hard to believe, but it's true. And you have to... I think the days of just opening a bookshop and thinking people are going to come through your door, they disappeared if they ever existed at all. And you have to always remember that you're a bookseller and that books are at the heart of everything that you do. But you definitely have to engage full scale with your local community. We do that through a variety of ways. We host tens and tens of events every single year. We attract key name authors. Last year, for example, we had Bridget Collins and Adam Nicholson and Isabella Weir and Isabella Tree and Alison Weir, Beaver and Dave Goulson. These people, and people like Ben. They don't necessarily buy the book, they really like the event. The benefits from it grows. In my time, I've also done high street tours here in East Grinstead. We have an amazing medieval high street. And more recently, I started a chess club about 7 years ago, and that's brought a whole new fraternity of people to the bookshop. We got our first little boy into the England chess team 18 months ago, and we've had 5 children get into Brighton College on chess scholarships. For me now, having done it for so long, everything I do has to be fun. Even coming on this show, it has to be fun, otherwise I'm not going to do it. And we've found a way to really, really engage with our local community and a much wider community. And we're not just surviving, we're actually thriving, but most importantly, we're having a really good time.
John, forgive me doubting that just for a moment. It is very, very important to enjoy one's work, but it is also important, in the case of a bookshop, to make a profit in order to keep the bookshop in business. So, I mean, even if you're doing marvellous things like chess events, which lead to young men becoming champions, you must still be thinking about the bottom line, surely.
Yes, you must run your bookshop in a very professional manner, and it must turn a profit. It can't be a hobby. At the end of the day, everything I do, all those other things, are geared to people coming into my shop and buying books. And as I say, for us, it's working.
I'm very pleased to hear that. Cheryl, tell me about the balance of enjoyment, profit and community service amongst your objectives in running a bookshop.
Well, margins are very tight. Booksellers work very hard. But like all booksellers, we're innovative and resilient, and we're used to sort of changing the way we work to adapt to the situation, in front of us. I too run loads and loads of events, not only adult events in the evening, but we run a lot of children's events because we see books and reading for pleasure as very important. And we help with literacy in local schools. So we're outreaching not only to the adult community with the adult events, but also children and schools. So that's a sort of a big part of our work. But yes, it's fun. It's we love it. We love it. We love having all the authors to come to Chorleywood, put Chorleywood on the map for sure. The big names that we now attract. So yeah, it is fun. It is fun.
But Cheryl, although you enjoy your work, I'm not sure you have much of a work-life balance, do you? It sounds like you're working pretty much all around the clock there.
No, my hobby's my work, I suppose. Running the events, and it's busy. It's busy for sure. But we love reading and love books, and it's all sort of it's part of what we do. We really enjoy it, and we've got a whole great team of booksellers that help, volunteers. We're very much heart of the community, and people support us in Chorleywood, and we have, as I say, lovely volunteers, and which makes it all possible and helps with the work-lifestyle balance.
Vivian, I think a lot of people will be surprised at this story, which is that there's been a resurgence, a revival of the corner bookshop, the local bookshop, because people will be thinking that now it's so easy to buy books online. How do you account for this fight back? This successful fight back, apparently, by the bookshop?
Well, I think certainly during COVID, people missed meeting people and talking. And I think the great strength of a local bookshop is having somebody that's interested in you. So you walk in, you say you want a new book, and you have somebody that is actually concentrating on you, rather than using an algorithm to choose a new book.
John, may I ask you, how do you have the expertise to recommend books? I mean, I have to read a number of books for my work, but you can't read hundreds of books. How can you make a meaningful recommendation to people who come into your bookshop?
Michael, I've spent 40 years now surrounded by books. I'm a passionate bookteller. I talk to all of my customers. You can't come into my shop and escape. I listen to what they say. You amass a huge amount of knowledge, and recommending books to people is an absolute pleasure. And it's quite easy to do after 40 years. There's no shortage of wonderful books out there.
Well, I hope our viewers will keep watching, because later on we're going to be talking about a book that's coming up in the second half. For the time being, thank you very much to John Pye, who owns East Grinstead Bookshop, Cheryl Sherville of Chorleywood and Gerrards Cross Bookshops, and Venetia Vivian of Barnes Bookshop. And the next chapter of Sunday with Michael Portillo will begin in just a few minutes, because we've booked Stefan Kyriazis for his weekly theatre review. Stay with us.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. With the grace of a live trapeze artist, Stefan Kuriazis has swung into the studio during the break. That contrived cue is intended to suggest that he's been to the Cirque du Soleil. Hello, Stefan.
Maybe I have. I was looking for you up there, I have to say. I'm sure I spotted you in a little white leotard swinging from the rafters. Could only have been you. I have. This one is Alegria, which we know is happiness or joy. And we've got a whole series of anniversaries this time. So this one is the 30th anniversary of the show. We know there are hundreds of Cirque du Soleils all over the place. I rather like this one. It's still spectacular on an epic scale, but it's quite pared back. It is lots of that very traditional sort of towers of men balancing, one girl with sort of millions of hula hoops, lots of acrobatics and tumbling. It's very sort of traditional circus with sort of Eastern European roots, lots of clowning. We've got a gorgeous clip, which will give you a little bit, and if we can spot Michael in there, it's a prize for somebody.
My heart is in my mouth when I see this, because there was actually a nasty accident to one of the Cirque du Soleils.
Yes.
Things can go wrong.
They're wired. They're wired up now, which I don't remember in the past, and it's a difficult one because it takes away a little bit of that sort of death-defying jeopardy. But it's still, I mean, if you have, I'm a bit vertigo-y, and I'm looking up, and it gives me the wobbles. But the final trapeze act, it's the traditional one with all the great big nets, no wires or anything like that, and it's jaw-dropping.
Where can this be seen?
This is on at the Royal Albert Hall, and this is on until March the 3rd.
Right, Royal Albert Hall. And maybe just have a look at a strange photograph, which our viewers, I hope, are going to find interesting. Now, there. Well, you're laughing because you know what that is. What is that, Stefan? And let's go to the next one. This may help viewers to understand what this is. Aha! It is I. And this is, I went to the Cirque du Soleil a few years ago. Montreal is its hometown. And I was made up and made into a sort of green bug. And then I went upside down in a wheel, which was all very, very good fun. Now, let's move on. Cruel Intentions next?
We can do Cruel Intentions. It's based on the 1999 film, so 25th anniversary this time, which is obviously the Choderlos de Laclos epistolary novel about the two scheming nobles. The film in 1999 is a great teen classic, transported to the Upper East Side, New York high school. So it's kind of that dynamic and gave it some real juice. The film is wonderful. Ryan Philippe, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Reese Witherspoon. And this show has actually pretty much taken the script of the film. There's no credited writer for it, but turned it into a musical. So lots of Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, NSYNC, but also some kind of grungy garbage and Losing My Religion type songs by R.E.M. So it's kind of peppy. It's really fun. It's very camp. Lots and lots of laughs from the audience. You get that thing where a song starts and you get a little giggle through the audience when they recognise it. It's incredibly entertaining. For me, a little bit, the basic story is so dark.
Yes, I was going to say, I mean, it's basically about the seduction of virgins, of innocence, and it's all about a bet. It's all about two people behaving extremely badly.
Yes, and trying to ultimately break each other's hearts. And it has a terrible, tragic ending. And the show sort of plays with it in a sort of very coy high school, isn't this naughty way. But the ending is so devastating and it's skimmed past in a couple of seconds. And I think it's really fun. It doesn't really, to me, honour the source material, but it's great fun. And that one's on at the Other Palace, just by the side of Buckingham Palace. But if you want the absolute cream, even better than Cirque du Soleil, then I would say Manon is on at the moment at the Royal Opera House. And please look at this gorgeous clip that we've got here from the show.
Yeah, look. I'm pleased to say that I have tickets for this at the beginning of March. It's quite a long run, therefore. Why is Manon so magnificent?
It's absolutely glorious because ballet is often, it's very pretty, but the core story is sometimes not that detailed. This is an incredibly powerful, based on the opera and the novel before. So it's a powerful story. Young girl comes to the big city. She's already the companion to a rich, much older man. She's kind of being moved and sold up and up and up to richer men by her brother, falls in love with a penniless writer, and then she's torn between, in those days, what would be security and money and, gorgeous things, or love and possible penury. And the dynamic and the pull between that is incredible because not only is the story all the way through powerful, the choreography incredibly tells the story. So we have lots of very impressive moments, but there's this. It's Kenneth Macmillan's choreography, so 50th anniversary.
So very traditional choreography and costuming,
but with a modern twist. So it's fast and speedy, and so much of it is. It's not the big flourishes that you get in a grand pas de deux from ballet. A lot of it is reaching and pulling. She spends a lot of her time, even thrown up in the air, coming down in a ball like she's hiding. There's 4 pas de deux. That's that incredible elegy that runs all the way through the show. And the pas de deux take you from sort of giddy infatuation to sort of lust and love, and then worry as everything terribly starts falling apart. And then the final bit you see where she's in rags. I can barely speak about the final part of it. It's absolutely exquisite. It's so well danced. I saw William Bracewell and Yasmin Nagdi, but there's tons of incredible pairings for it. But this, we got an absolute standing ovation. I saw it last night. People don't stand at the ballet very often. It's not the thing. Roars, people on their feet, and the two of them at the end knocked it out of the park. I cannot recommend this enough. And I know you love a bit of out to the cinema. February the 7th, live stream from the Royal Opera House. You can go and see it in cinemas.
I do love that. And I also know that I went online just the last 2 days and there were still tickets for Manon. Very quickly, do you want to look forward to the Royal Shakespeare Company season?
Yeah, they've just announced a massive new programme. They've got 2 people in charge now. Number one, big news, 25,000 tickets at £25.
Gosh.
They also run this TikTok £10 ticket deal as well. They're doing a massive outreach to get it more out to people. So they're still doing lots of Shakespeare, but they're doing the Buddha of Suburbia. They have a Ukrainian version of King Lear, and also they have the Northern Ballet coming in to do their Romeo and Juliet. So they're trying to broaden the genre, honour Shakespeare's roots, but bring people in. So please go.
That sounds absolutely magnificent. Thank you very much indeed, Stefan Kyriazis. What a range of things you brought to us today. Well, that brings us to the end of the first hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. I will be back in just a few minutes' time with plenty more, including some expert advice on cheese and wine pairings to celebrate National Cheese Lovers Day. See you soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News. Warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo. Last week brought an alarming alert from a NATO official that European countries could find themselves at war with Russia in the next 2 decades. Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer said we must expect the unexpected. As Russia conscripts its youth to fight and places its national budget and weapons factories on a war footing, how could democracies ready themselves for the conflict? I'll be joined by Professor Richard Sacroix and Defence Editor of the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. On a more cheerful note, Saturday was National Cheese Lovers' Day. Please don't kick up a stink that we're a day late. A connoisseur will help me to make heavenly pairings of cheese and wine. The wealthy and accomplished Sassoon family has been part of the infrastructure of British public life alongside the Mitfords and the Churchills for a long time. They trace their origins to Baghdadi Jewish merchants who fled the city and settled in British India in the 19th century. A new book by Joseph Sassoon charts the stratospheric success of the family known as the Rothschilds of the East, whose compulsion to integrate with the British aristocracy brought their decline. I'll speak to Joseph about a book that reveals as much about Britain's decline as about that of the Sassoons. And finally, one television traveller will chat with another. I'll be joined by Simon Reeve, whose new BBC series Wilderness takes him to some of the most remote and beautiful places on Earth. All of that to come, but first, your headlines with Sam Francis.
Michael, thanks very much, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's just after 12 o'clock. The headlines. An amber weather warning is now in place across most of the UK. That's as Storm Isha moves in. A status red warning has also been issued in Ireland. Forecasters are warning of powerful winds of up to 80 miles an hour, with coastal areas particularly at risk. Travel disruption is also expected, with some roads and bridges closed as a precaution. Police are advising against any unnecessary travel. Well, our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, says conditions are expected to get worse tonight.
The rain at the front of this storm is now arriving in Northern Ireland. Winds are picking up but it's expected at 6 o'clock this evening, when that amber warning goes into place for the whole of the province, that those damaging winds will start to arrive. People have been told to stay away from coastal areas and side roads for fear of falling debris.
Well, US troops have been injured in a rocket attack in western Iraq, which was claimed by a group affiliated with Iran. An unspecified number of American troops are undergoing evacuation for possible traumatic brain injuries following that strike. A group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq claimed responsibility, which is the latest in a series of strikes against US targets in recent weeks. It marks another escalation amid heightened tensions in the region following the outbreak of the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister is rowing back on suggestions of a two-state solution with Palestine. Benjamin Netanyahu appeared to double down on his position, posting to social media that he will not compromise on Israel's control over the entire area of west of Jordan. That's despite Friday's call with US President Joe Biden, where he appeared to be open to some possible two-state proposals. The UK's chief rabbi has criticised the use of the word genocide to describe that situation in Gaza. Writing in the Telegraph newspaper today, Sir Ephraim Mervis said that campaigners are hijacking the word, trying to demonise Israel. He's described that as disinformation, though. He argues that the country is fighting a defensive war that it did not want or ask for. Amid escalating global tensions, the government here in the UK says it will boost the Royal Navy's defences with some £405 million of funding. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News earlier this morning that Britain is taking a lead.
We're investing £288 billion over the next decade to make sure that we do pump more money into our military, into our equipment, and that we can safely defend ourselves. And Britain's leading the way, as I said, in Ukraine, but actually also this week I announced an operation in Europe called Steadfast Defender, which is a NATO operation, which the United Kingdom's providing 40% of the ground troops and 50% of the overall personnel, even though there were 32 countries in total involved in this. So we really are leading from the front in the UK.
Well, in other news, tax cuts could be on the way this spring. That's as the Chancellor looks to relieve pressure on families. Ahead of the budget in March, Jeremy Hunt says the path to tax relief is working, as he pledged to stick to the government's economic plan. Economists estimate that he could be handed up to £10 billion by official forecasters next week, paving the way for some cuts to taxes in the spring. And we've learned today that detectives investigating the deaths of 4 people in Norfolk have confirmed they're now not looking for anyone else in connection with that incident. The bodies of 2 young girls, a 36-year-old woman and a 45-year-old man, were found in a house on Allen Bedford Crescent on Friday morning. It comes after the Norfolk Police Force referred itself to the independent watchdog after failing to respond to a 999 call from that home where the 4 bodies were discovered. Post-mortem examinations are being carried out today. In Germany, tens of thousands of people are taking to the streets in protest against right-wing political parties. Marchers carrying banners saying against hate, defend democracy and others are gathering in more than 100 cities and towns. It comes after reports revealed a secret meeting had taken place involving a popular Alternative Party for Germany, where it's alleged they discussed a plan to deport people from so-called non-German backgrounds, which would include many German citizens. The party, known as AfD, is currently polling second in national surveys. Back here in the UK, thousands of patients with inherited blood disorders are set to undergo a world first in genetic testing. Starting tomorrow, that's Monday, people in England with sickle cell disorder and thalassemia can access the test. Improved blood matching and reducing the risk of complications during transfusion will benefit from those tests. The NHS is the first healthcare system in the world to offer it, benefiting around 18,000 eligible patients. And that's the latest from the GB Newsroom for now. For more, we're on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. Just say, play GB News. Now, though, let's get more from Michael.
Thank you, Sam Francis. NATO is, quotes, preparing for a conflict with Russia, close quotes, if Moscow chooses to attack more European countries, according to Admiral Rob Bauer. The Dutch chair of NATO's military committee made his remarks at a press conference in response to a question about Sweden, whose government has told its citizens to brace for possible war. This is as Russia has escalated its defence spending to 40% of GDP. To answer the question of how NATO members, which are democracies, could adapt their societies in preparation for war with Russia, I'm joined by Robert Fox, defence editor of the Evening Standard, and Richard Sackville of the University of Kent, who's author of Frontline Ukraine on the origins of the Russo-Ukrainian war. Robert, the question that I posed, how on earth could democracies move from where they are to being prepared for a war? We're talking about a change in society, a change in the tempo of what goes on in our factories, a change in the level of defence spending, huge changes.
A mental shift, absolutely. At the beginning of the week, Grant Shapps seemed to get very near it, and he gave a much tighter timeline than Rob Bauer. He said he thought there could be conflict with Russia. I don't know what this was based on, within 5 years. But what he mentioned in that address to the media, a big press conference at Lancaster House, is that the era of the peace dividend is well over. And the trouble is that most of the public don't get that. There's no reason why they should. But you look at the recruiting figures for all three armed services in this country, they're very, very poor. The outflow is considerably bigger in quality and quantity than the inflow is. And so we've got to do something about it. And by the way, this sort of passive idea that things are going to go pretty well with the peace dividend at the end of the Cold War, that's been compounded by what has happened during COVID, where people have been driven in on themselves. They're far more private. They don't see themselves a public service as desirable or even a necessity. Any government coming in, and possibly before the next general election, has got to change the messaging on that. They're not doing terribly well at the moment, but I think it's national resilience and national security. But don't retool the old machine and say we're going to do NATO, which was designed to confront the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. You're going to require service, resilience, defence and security, but in different ways and for different coordinates. It's not a revolution, it's an evolution.
You referred to politicians not having got it. You referred to the public not having got it, but the politicians haven't got it. I know that Grant Shapps said that, but there's no evidence actually of a change in policy. There's no evidence that we are prepared to deal with the fact that we have, possibly about 9 surface ships ever at sea at one time, that we have virtually no air defences.
We have no air defence, realistically, yes.
That, as you say, the army is shrinking, the navy has shrunk to the extent that they're decommissioning ships because they don't have the crews. So I'm quite surprised, aren't you, that despite the fact that we've had a war between Ukraine and Russia, which is more or less on our doorstep, that there has been really no change in public policy.
Well, the argument about the Red Sea, too, it's amazing how, take the institutional narrative of the BBC. This is a bolt-on nuisance. This is a needless escalation. But keeping the high seas open, the rights of passage, according to the laws enshrined by the UN Charter, this goes by the board. It's pretty awful when 95% plus heavy trade has to go by sea. You're absolutely right. The debate is not getting through. Sorry, can I get into flagellant mode? I don't think the media's been very good about this either, in saying, what is the world we're in? What are we going to look at? What are the actual threats? What are the potential threats? Because where Russia is sitting at the moment, which is so fascinating, it's not the old Soviet beast. This is an imperial vision, as we get from Putin, and I'm quoting, looking at Putin's own words. But he's got very odd bedfellows, an incredibly aggressive North Korea and Iran. And we're going to have to think of what it means. And I don't think it's going to be the confrontation of heavy ironmongery armies, because we know it's going to be about cyber, it's going to be in space, it's going to be influence operations, you name it.
Richard, you might have very different ideas about the origin of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But for the moment, can I focus you on whether you think our society needs to change in the face of the position that we now find ourselves in, and how you imagine a democratic society could change?
I think that society is responding perhaps in a rather healthy manner, and that is a scepticism about war fever and about the militarization. It's actually arguing and sort of implicitly suggesting that the peace after the Cold War, the peace dividend we talked about, it wasn't so much lost as squandered by our mistakes. That is the democracies which you mentioned. Certainly, I believe that democracies should defend themselves, but they should defend themselves in the context of defending the international system, that is international law as established with the United Nations in 1945. And not only the institutions of 1945, the United Nations, but also that spirit which was cooperative, that peaceful. Remember the Soviet Union and the United States and the United Kingdom obviously worked together to establish this new peace order. And what the perception certainly is, and it's not just Russia, it's also China and even many parts of the global south who simply do not accept that narrative that violence and that war is forthcoming. So this talk from the Dutch military figure, and of course he just joins a chorus. This Bild last week announced also that war is coming. The Baltic republics talk about it, and I think the public is quite right to be deeply sceptical about this narrative, which is emerging at a time when clearly the war in Ukraine is not going well. So instead of focusing on the failures in Ukraine, they're now trying to spread the theatre of action, if you like. We're in a deep Cold War, and we should think about ways of getting out of it.
I mean, sentiment is one thing. You've described sentiment and opinions that have been given, but military actions are fact. And the fact is that Ukraine has been attacked by Russia since 2014 with a mass invasion over the last 2 years. That is a fact, isn't it? It is a fact, but we must always look at context and causes. And the idea that the invasion, which was an invasion and, in my view, illegal, on the 24th of February 2022 was unprovoked is quite wrong. Even Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, in the autumn admitted it was ultimately all about NATO. That's his words, all about NATO. And so, therefore, in international politics, it's always action and reaction. And I must say, the United Kingdom plays a rather painful and difficult role in all of this, in provoking the war. And I have in mind many things, but in particular the HMS Defender event of June 2021. Remember the ship clipped the territorial war claimed around Sevastopol. And I know from talking to senior Russian analysts that this absolutely, they'd never seen Putin, well, a few times, as angry as he was then. And in his mind, it began to take shape that the West, NATO, will not stop. And now, if we don't start, hold the line, then, maybe his analysis was mistaken. But that was certainly the perception. And international politics is all about perception and not escalating, but finding a way to de-escalate. From where we are now, you're proposing then that we shouldn't be changing our society to get ready for war, but we should be de-escalating. What is the de-escalation that we might perform that wouldn't strike someone else as appeasement?
Well, this word appeasement, it's almost as if it's always 1938. And that's a very tired argument. Unfortunately, it's not 1938. It's 1913. And we're heading for the First World War, the Great War, which could have been avoided by adroit diplomacy. As you remember, July 1914, no one really expected the war even then. And then it came out of the blue. We are in the foothills of the Third World War, and we really must not push our way up that mountain. We should go down that mountain, and the way to deal with it is dialogue and diplomacy and understanding the position of the adversary. It doesn't mean you endorse their views, it doesn't mean you endorse their policies, but it does mean listening.
Robert, do you accept that even if part of your policy, where you're in government, would be to improve our defences, that dialogue with the Russians, for example, would also be an important part of the policy?
Absolutely essential. Yes, that is part of it, and that's why I agree with Richard, the opportunities that were missed. And I think, Richard, just to sort of take you up on it, I think there was inadvertent provocation. I think some people said some very, very foolish things leading up to the Georgia conflict. The pronouncements by people like David Miliband, when he was Foreign Secretary, about the the desirability, possibly, of membership of Georgia and Ukraine in NATO. It came up at the Bucharest summit that year. It struck me as being completely crazy at that time. What was he envisaging? Particularly when, at the Budapest agreement in 1994, which is so critical when Ukraine disarmed and seemingly Russia, Moscow, agreed to the national sovereignty of Ukraine, there was an understanding, whether it was written or not, that NATO would not go further east. And that is absolutely a given. Just to draw breath, is that I think we need far more skillful and agile planning for this. As I said, you don't need a revolution. We don't need that much more money for defence. But the money that has been dispensed so far, particularly on weapons systems, look at the latest National Audit Office's report. I mean, the kind of thing that Chaps is talking about is actually completely unaffordable in the terms that he says. And the problem is exactly where you say, where it lies. We haven't got the personnel. We're going to need the personnel as we get to become an ageing society in the voluntary sector for security at the immediate abroad and at home. Anything from tsunamis, from storms and pandemics. What happens if 2 or 3 of those things happen at the same time? There we are.
And we have aircraft carriers that, in my opinion, we cannot possibly defend.
We should never have bought them first.
And it was certainly the case that when I was Defence Secretary, we did not entertain the possibility of Ukraine coming into NATO or anything like that. It's something I felt quite uncomfortable about ever since, but actually I think it was a sound policy and a sound position. Many thanks to Professor Richard Sakwa and Robert Fox. In a few moments, I'll be joined in the studio by a cheese and wine aficionada who will share her favourite pairings as we celebrate National Cheese Lovers Day. Gentlemen, thank you.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews at gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We have stocked the studio with a delicious selection of cheese and wine because Saturday was National Cheese Lovers Day. Jessica Summer is the Chief Executive of Mouse and Grape, which expertly creates cheese and wine hampers. Jessica, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And you have displayed things very, very beautifully.
Thank you very much.
Are there any general points about how one pairs a cheese and a wine?
Yes, very much so. So the important thing to consider is that you want two complementing flavours. So cheese and wine have obviously a whole spectrum of things going on there. So it can be very easy to get something that doesn't work very well together. So you've always got to be mindful of things that go really well, but then you could also go for contrasting things like sweet and savoury as well.
So can you give us examples today of where you, well, how have you paired these things?
Yeah, of course.
Are they basically contrasts or are they complements?
So we've got two different styles today. So we've got a gorgeous Terrain Sauvignon Blanc, and these pairings all here are from my hampers, and they're like the most favourite ones that I do. So here, if you want to grab a glass, we've got a lovely Terrain Sauvignon Blanc, and this has got lovely kind of grapefruit and then also elderflower flavour, and then it's got that high acidity. So if you take a little sip, and that's paired with Rachel here, which is the goat's milk cheese. And this, if you give that a smell, it's quite delicate. And the wine was also quite delicate as well. And the thing that you need to do with this, with cheese and wine, is you need to eat them at the same time. And a lot of the time...
Eat and drink.
Yeah, eat and drink, exactly. So if you take a bite and then take a swallow of the wine.
Where is this lovely cheese from?
So this is from Somerset, and it's White Lake Dairy, and they make... It's like a gateway goat cheese, really. It's not too overly goaty, and therefore it doesn't overpower. But I think with the wine, it really kind of creates a flavour explosion, and it's very delicious.
Lovely. Tell me a little bit about your business. So you do hampers.
Yes, I do, yeah. So I do curated cheese and wine paired hampers, which ship all across the country. And then I also do cheese and wine paired tasting events as well, because I'm a sommelier and also a cheesemonger too.
Oh, my goodness, you're a sommelier and a cheesemonger.
Yes.
So, sommelier, I know a bit about that. How does one become a cheesemonger? I mean, that's also a question of qualifications and years of training and so on.
Exactly. So you can do a cheese qualification, which is with the Academy of Cheese, which is a real place. I would very much recommend doing it. And yeah, you study and you learn all about cheeses. And as you can see, just from the different cheeses that we've got on the plate, from your creamy Gorgonzola all the way to your aged Gouda, isn't that amazing that both of these are cow's milk, but you can create such contrasting different flavours?
Yes. Let us do our next pairing.
Yes, so we're moving on here to a Soave. So this is another white wine.
This is from Italy?
Italy, yes, exactly, from Lombardia. And you'll find here that this has got quite a different mouthfeel. It's a bit rounder and bigger. So you've got here Le Tour. So Le Tour is a creamy cheese, a bit like ice cream. And it's unusual because it's got 3 different milks. So it's ewe's milk, goat's milk and cow's milk.
Where is this from?
This is from Italy as well. From the similar region. And this is, if you take a bite and then take a sip of the wine as well, you'll find that the mouth-coating cheese is quite salty. And then if you take a sip of the wine, it makes the wine taste more fruity, because salt loves wine, because it makes the fruitiness come out there. And it's very, very delicious. And you could have this with the honey. Yeah, do you like that combination?
I do. I take my hat off to you, because you know, not only do you understand your two subjects, cheese and wine, but you understand how they come together. That's I'm really indebted to you for that.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, we'll move quickly on to, we've got a Barolo here. So this is...
Now, Barolo, I think of as quite a It's light coloured, but I think of it as quite a heavy Italian wine. Am I wrong?
It can be. I think it's lighter compared to the likes of like a Primitivo, something a bit heavier there. But also,
certainly with a lighter.
Yeah, it's got the gorgeous kind of cherry, and then also you've got the tannins there as well. Now we're going to go with my favourite cheese.
Gorgonzola.
Yes, Gorgonzola Dolce. I mean, this is my I could just eat this with a spoon. It's so delicious, and it's a classic of like what goes together grows together, because this is a regional pairing, and I just think that the saltiness of the cheese, again, I love getting the fruit flavours out of things, and that just works so magically for me. What do you think of that one?
I think it's lovely. I'm really enjoying my tour of Italy here.
Well, I'm gonna whip you away to France, which is the last one that we're going to go for.
That will be very acceptable.
Yes. So this here it's a lovely Bordeaux blend. So this is this one here, and this is we're going to go for two combinations here, which are the big bold flavours. So this here is an aged Gouda, and as you can see from the colour, that's the kind of will indicate the aging. But also you've got lovely salt crystals in here, and it's got a beautiful, if you smell the cheese, like salted caramel, fudge kind of aroma, and together this is kind of a star pairing for me.
Yes, and here, of course, you've mixed very different terrains. So this is a Dutch Gouda, presumably. All Gouda is Dutch, is it?
It is, yeah, and that's part of the fun as well, because I think sometimes people can get stuck with thinking you have to go just regional or you have to go country to country. Whereas when I put my combinations together for my hampers, I focus on flavour. So you want what's the best outcome flavour-wise. And I often say, I don't know if you've seen the film Ratatouille, so it's when the little rat, he's talking about putting those flavours together and getting a firework explosion moment. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for delicious flavours.
That has been a wonderful combination to end on. Do you know what use people make of your hampers? I mean, obviously they eat the cheese and they drink the wine, but are they kind of educating themselves? Are they having parties? They're saying, oh, we've got a hamper in, let's have 5 or 6
Yeah,
friends
absolutely.
round. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, that's...
Or are they picnicking?
You could do
all
either.
Of those things.
Yeah, you could do any of the above. The thing that's kind of a bit different about my hampers is that you get my guidebook in there, and I've written a guidebook which you can use at home to take you through the tasting, and also my own personal tasting notes as to why I've put them together. But then you can also have me, because I travel around and do at-home tasting events and also corporate events as well.
Well, how lucky GB News has been to have you today. Thank you very much indeed. Jessica Summer. In a few minutes, I'll explore the remarkable rise of the Sassoon family and its entry into British public life. Before that, here are the latest news headlines with Sam Price.
Michael, thanks very much, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's just after 12:30. The headlines. An amber weather warning is now in place across most of the UK as Storm Isha moves in. There's also a status red warning issued in Ireland as forecasters are warning of powerful winds of up to 80 miles an hour, with coastal areas particularly at risk. Travel disruption is also expected, with some roads and bridges closed as a precaution. Police are advising against any unnecessary travel. Our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie has told us earlier that conditions are expected to get worse tonight. Meanwhile, US troops have been injured in a fresh rocket attack in western Iraq, which has been claimed by a group affiliated with Iran. An unspecified number of people are undergoing evaluation for possible traumatic brain injuries from that strike. A group called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq claimed responsibility for the attack, which is the latest in a series of strikes against US targets in recent weeks. It marks another escalation amid heightened tensions in the region following the outbreak of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister is rowing back on suggestions of a two-state solution with Palestine. Benjamin Netanyahu appeared to double down on his position, posting to social media that he will not compromise on Israel's control over the entire area. That's despite a call on Friday with the US President Joe Biden, where he appeared to be open to some two-state proposals. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says that Mr Netanyahu's comments are very disappointing. And thousands of patients with inherited blood disorders are set to undergo a world first in genetic testing. Starting tomorrow, people in England with sickle cell disorder and thalassemia can access that test. It's designed to improve blood matching and reduce the risk of complications during a transfusion. The NHS is the first healthcare system in the world to offer it. benefiting around 18,000 eligible patients. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Thank you very much, Sam Francis. The Sassoon family became a fixture of British public life, as prominent as noble families who can trace their origins to Normandy in 1066. This enterprising family of Baghdadi Jews fled that city as refugees in the early 19th century, making their fortune as merchants in British India and developing a network of trade in cotton, opium and silk throughout the British Empire. In a new book called The Global Merchants, the Enterprise and Extravagance of the Sassoon Dynasty, Joseph Sassoon, who comes from a branch of the family that stayed in Baghdad for much longer, charts their prudent rise to prosperity and their extravagant decline towards failure. Joseph is Professor of History and Political Economy, as well as Director for the Centre for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., from where he now joins me. Hello. Very good to see you, Joseph. It's a fascinating book. The family rose by being very prudent, by being rather cautious. Obviously, they had a terrific talent for business, but they were careful not to overstretch themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the fascinating aspects of it, that the founder of the dynasty, David Sassoon, actually was never in the trading business, nor his family. But he learned. He was a quick learner. Once he got to Bombay, Mumbai today, he started going to the cotton exchange. He started visiting traders, other firms, and learning. And step by step, he learned the business and took advantage of global and international affairs that were taking place around the world, whether the Opium Wars or the American Civil Wars. Each one of those wars changed a lot of the situations and conditions throughout the world.
We're all struggling with this question of our colonial legacy. And from my own fairly recent visit, making a TV programme to Hong Kong, I must say I find one of the most indefensible aspects of the British Empire the two Opium Wars, where essentially we went to war with China in order to force the Chinese people to consume the opium which we needed to sell to the Chinese in order to pay for our habit of drinking tea. It is a very difficult moment in our history, isn't it? This, the Sassoon family made its money from opium.
Absolutely, and I deal with that in the book quite a lot. Yes, I mean, David Sassoon, once he arrived into Bombay in the early 1830s, he decided to throw the lot with the British Empire, the strongest superpower. But you have to understand that also, coming as a refugee family, there was only one power in the world at the time, and that was the British Empire. Yet, at the same time, one has to take things into consideration that opium has been going on for 5,000 years or more in these parts of the world, and continued. You know, until 1907, you could buy in New York or London or Paris from any pharmacy opium. So it has to be taken in perspective of the time rather than today, given what we know. But it is a bleak part of the history.
Yes, and rather like the enormous campaign in Britain which sank first the slave trade and then slavery, there was, of course, an enormous anti-opium campaign in Britain which eventually resulted in Parliament taking action.
I can't hear you.
I wonder whether you can hear me now. What I was saying was that in the same way as there was an enormous campaign in Britain, first against the slave trade and then against slavery. Oh, what a pity. We've lost Joseph Sassoon. Maybe we'll get him back in a moment. After the break, I'll be joined by fellow travel broadcaster Simon Reeve to discuss his new series, Wilderness, which is on the BBC.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Joseph Sassoon was with me before the break to discuss his new book, The Global Merchants, The Enterprise and Extravagance of the Sassoon Dynasty, and he joins me now again. Joseph, I was just saying that in the same way as there was a great campaign in Britain, first against the slave trade and then against slavery, so there was a great campaign against opium, which eventually led Parliament to take action, with, of course, consequences for the Sassoon family.
That is correct. Although the Imperial Commission of Inquiry that was set up in 1895 and lasted for 4 or 5 years and published afterwards 7 volumes, 2,500 pages, the conclusions was incredible and absolutely that all the effect has been exaggerated, and that opium is no different from alcohol if it taken in small quantities. And in fact, only really at the end of World War I, the case was closed. But by World War I, all the governments took over the opium industry anyway, as it was needed. But the Imperial Commission, which interviewed 20,000 people made a very strong recommendation that opium trade should continue.
Yeah, that is extraordinary. I want to come to a part of the book that I found absolutely fascinating. You put down the decline of the Sassoon family, of its fortunes, to its Anglicisation. Trying to become part of the British establishment, trying to ape the habits of the British aristocracy, developing a connection, a love of sport and of leisure, no longer wishing to work hard, despising industry and commerce, loving aristocracy. These were the things that brought the family to its decline.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's part of any intergenerational wealth issue. You know, the adage that first generation builds and third generation waste is correct in this case and in many other cases. But here it got really boosted by this desperate desire to be wanting to be part of the club. And the club was the upper class, the aristocracy, and the aristocracy did not work, but engaged in hunting and shooting and having a huge estate. And meanwhile, they were dismissive of what was happening around the world, the beginning of the decline of the British Empire, the Industrial Revolution and all its implications, the change to heavy industry. In fact, all commodity trading began to die down by the early 20th century. They really missed on that. And part of it is because their leaders were really busy in politics. Two members of them were members of parliament. The first son, one of the sons of the grandson of David Sassoon, the founder, was an MP for Hythe, Kent. Then his son, Philip Sassoon. You know, so they became far more interested in politics, in art, in all other aspects, but unfortunately not in business.
Joseph Sassoon, I'm most grateful. And I found your book told me as much about the decline of Britain as it did about the decline in the fortunes of the Sassoon family. This extraordinary thing where in 19th century society, it continued into the next 2 centuries, I think, the creation of wealth was despised and what was celebrated was leisure and sport and aristocratic pursuits. An extraordinary story and well worth telling. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for having me.
My next guest has, as I have, fallen into the indescribably lucky position of making travel programmes for television. However, while I recently have been exploring the cultural capitals of Europe, sipping coffees, strolling through palazzi and sampling delicious cuisine, he's been at risk of life and limb, trekking through the world's last great wildernesses, scaling the Andes Mountains, evading insects in the Congolese rainforest, and being watchful for lions in the Kalahari Desert. Let's take a look at that.
We're coming under attack from angry bees, so everything is just getting quite a bit trickier. Getting properly attacked now by... Oh, sorry. I think this is just about the toughest jungle I've been in. Jungles in Colombia, in Burma, in Borneo. They're not as bad. They're not as uncomfortable. They're not as sticky and bitey as this is. This is tough. This is really tough. I think this is going to be... We are going to be very, very lucky to see bonobos here. I hate to say it. But then suddenly we do get lucky. Yeah. Noises ahead. We think we might have heard some bonobos up ahead. And then, just in front of me, I can see shapes moving in the trees.
That's just a sample of the BBC's Wilderness with Simon Reeve. And Simon is with me. Welcome very much to GB News. Great to see you. Your directors must have loved you at that moment because they absolutely adore when the presenter is in jeopardy and in discomfort.
They do, don't they? And sometimes they try and gently create a situation where that's likely to happen. Oh dear! Simon's fallen into a peat bog. What a surprise.
How fit have you had to make yourself to endure this sort of filming?
I think, I did put in some work before this series in particular. Physical fitness, so I was running around my little area in Devon for several months before we started this series, wearing a 15-kilogram weight vest, which makes you look like a complete complete nut. And I was trying to make an effort. I didn't want to be the one who let the side down. But at the same time, obviously, on an expedition like that, we also went up into the Andes Mountains. Just one little slip on a rock, as you all know, can result in a disaster for the entire team.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's no fun if you're out of commission, then the whole thing is out of commission, and you go back to the drawing board.
They want to inflict a small amount of pain and suffering on you, but not so much that it derails the whole filming. That would be have a small illness, but not a fatal one. That would be bad.
And we have all these tick box exercises where we have to show how we've taken account of health and safety. And then you arrive in the situation, and it's always completely different from what you expected.
Yeah, no plan survives contact with the enemy, does it?
It does not.
Or reality, for that matter. You don't have to tick boxes, do you? I'm really lucky. I stay out of that.
I know I said just now that I sip coffee and walk through Palazzi, but actually I've also performed with king cobras in Thailand and things like that. I mean, the most frightening moment in my life was that, with a king cobra.
Really?
Yeah, I was holding on to this king cobra.
Worse than the House of Commons?
Absolutely.
Or similar?
I was holding on to this king cobra with two other people.
Right.
And they were operating on it, and there came a moment where it had to be put back in its basket, and I don't think the handlers really had a plan for that bit. And that was
that's a fundamental part, isn't
terrifying.
it? But I've seen you, Michael. I came home from a very tough expedition. There was us going through not this series, but I came home, I remember, and I put the bags down, and honestly, the TV went on that night, and there was Michael Portillo putting rose petals into his bath with the view beyond of the Taj Mahal.
I do remember that.
And I remember feeling, oh my goodness, Michael, what a gig you've got. Amazing.
Guilty as charged. What was your worst moment on this gig?
I think it was when Eric, our director, came down with a really bad fever. His temperature really started rocketing up, and we were on a boat going across somewhere called the Coral Triangle, which is the area of spectacular sea around the Philippines and Indonesia. And we were a long way from land, and I think that's a moment, I don't know if you have this, but our TV bubble was pierced, as it were. So any pretense that we were on a jolly television adventure was slightly broken at that moment when we realised how far we were from land and how difficult it would be to get him to medical help. That I felt he's one of life's great people, so it was a horrible thought that he might be suffering or worse, and we were too far from medical help to get him assistance.
And what was your best moment? I mean, maybe something you saw, maybe some wildlife that you saw.
Well, I think probably because it's in my head, seeing the bonobos there. Bonobos are quite fascinating little creatures.
Tell us about bonobos.
Yeah, they're probably our closest living relatives in the animal kingdom, closer even than chimpanzees. I think chimpanzees can be very violent creatures, cannibalistic, aggressive, almost constantly. And I think we've studied them a lot as humans have studied them a lot. And I'm not sure you're familiar with veneer theory, but it's this idea that to scratch our surface with our fine jackets and refined manners, and underneath lurks the heart of a violent ape. And hopefully, bonobos show an alternative possibility for us because they're very peaceful. They very rarely display violent tendencies. They're lovers rather than fighters, perhaps not disconnected to the fact that the females are in charge in their communities. I don't know if you approve or not.
Well, actually, I studied meerkats once, and in the case of meerkats, females are in charge, but that doesn't stop them being quite violent. So the female exerts control, and does that partly by having the power of expulsion, so it can expel meerkats from the group. And they may
who are acting up.
They may then perish in the desert.
Bonobos are similar.
In the Kalahari,
yeah,
where
they
you've
can
just
expel.
been. May I ask you a bit about your origins? I mean, how have you got to be doing this? We've both agreed that this is the best thing you could possibly do.
Yes, I agree.
And I came from a rather strange origin, which was out of politics.
Yeah.
But your background, for instance, as a child, did not suggest that you were going to be a TV presenter, did it?
No, that is, I think, a fair summary of my early existence. I grew up not that far from here in a grey area of West London. There's no media in my background at all. I was I was a very naughty child, and then into teens I had a lot of trouble with my head health, with my mental health, as we would say now. I was hopeless at school. I mean, the polar opposite of your magnificent self as can be, really. I flunked out of school with my first exams, and I was totally lost. I had no idea what to do with my life. I think we're still very bad in this country at picking up those particularly young men who've fallen through cracks and channeling them and making them productive members of society. And I was lost for a long time.
But you are then a great example to such people, because whatever your start may be, you can make things better.
But I think I was very lucky. I got a job.
I'm sure you were, but did you also do it by your own efforts? Did you also pull yourself up?
Yes, you have to. When the door opens a little bit, you have to be willing, I think, to step through. And I had to adapt. I had to become a slightly different person. I had to be not talk with quite my West London estuary English almost accent. I had to fit in. I started work as a postboy on the Sunday Times. I owe my little career to Andrew Neil in many ways, who was the editor at the time. But you're absolutely right. When opportunity came my way, I grasped it and I worked really hard. But you have to have that, I think anyway, I don't know if you agree, you have to have that moment of good fortune, opportunity or luck to then make it happen. And then I've rolled with it really since. I became an author, I wrote books. I wrote the first book on Osama bin Laden.
And
that led to making TV programmes.
That was an absolutely extraordinary breakthrough. This series is on from when to when?
From tonight, 4 weeks, Wilderness, 9 p.m. BBC 2.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
An excellent slot, I entirely approve. And I'm very glad to see you return safe and sound.
That's very kind, thank you.
So, many thanks indeed to Simon Reeve. His series begins today. And that, unfortunately, brings us to the end of today's programme. My thanks to all my guests for joining me on a Sunday morning. Thank you for coming in on a Sunday morning. I will be back again next week. Don't go away, as Dawn Neeson will be here shortly after the break. But as far as I'm concerned, until next week, bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. Storm Isha very much in charge of our weather over the next couple of days, bringing some very heavy rain and some strong winds too. It'll slowly be moving its way towards us through Sunday evening, bringing that heaviest rain to those western coasts and the strongest winds through the early hours of Monday morning. That rain continues to spread its way north and eastwards later through Sunday, and that's when we see those winds really starting to pick up. Gusts widely 60 to 70 miles an hour along those western coasts, perhaps 80 to 90 across northern parts of Scotland through the early hours of Monday. A milder night than we've seen over recent weeks, perhaps 6 or 7 degrees quite widely, maybe 8 or 9 across the very far southeast, but it's a very windy start to the day on Monday. Winds will gradually start to ease through the morning, but it still will be staying very blustery through much of Monday itself. Showers widely pushing in from the west, these turning particularly heavy at times, perhaps even the odd flake of snow across the high ground of Scotland. There will be some sunshine, particularly further south and further east, and temperatures here maybe 10 or 11 degrees, but with those strong blustery winds, that'll take the edge off those temperatures. Tuesday will start a little bit drier, perhaps some sunshine across those eastern areas through the morning, but the next system quite quickly pushes in from the west. Rain spreading its way north and eastwards, turning heaviest along those western coasts and bringing with it some strong winds too. A little brighter on Wednesday, but further wet and windy weather is on its way later in the week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to GB News Sunday. Happy Sunday indeed. Hope you're having a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us this lunchtime. I'm Dawn Neeson, and for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Cracking show coming up in the first hour. It's been reported that the government are cracking down on activist civil servants who waste taxpayer money on diversity. Under plans discussed with Kemi Badenoch and Esther McVeigh, diversity meetings would have to be held before work, during lunch breaks or in the evenings, their own time. But is focusing on diversity a waste of money? Your money, remember? Then several dangerous and life weather warnings have been issued for today, with Brits told not to travel as the UK prepares for Storm Isha to bring 80-mile-an-hour winds. 7 weather warnings, including 2 rare amber alerts, have been issued by the Met Office for large swathes of the country today. Our reporters will be, we've sent them out in the danger zone, we'll be there live. And Labour's Hilary Benn says the EU will breathe a sigh of relief if Keir Starmer wins the upcoming general election. The very vocal Remainer also appeared to suggest Labour should seek closer ties with the Brussels bloc if Rishi Sunak is ousted from Downing Street. Will Labour drag us back to the continent, though? but this show is absolutely nothing without you and your views. Not what I think, what you think. So let me know your thoughts on all the stories we're discussing today. Email me on gbviews@gbnews.com or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. Very, very simple. But first, let's check out the news headlines with the lovely Sam Francis.
Dawn, thank you very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom. The headlines are just after 1 o'clock. Well, our top story today, the Met Office has now issued a rare danger to life warning across most of the UK as Storm Isha moves in. We're being warned not to travel as winds of now up to 90 miles an hour are expected. Forecasters are also warning there could be damage to homes and buildings. Our Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie says conditions are expected to get worse tonight.
The rain at the front of this storm is now arriving in Northern Ireland. Winds are picking up, but it's expected at 6 o'clock this evening, when that amber warning goes into place for the whole of the province, that those damaging winds will start to arrive. People have been told to stay away from coastal areas and side roads for fear of falling debris.
Well, in other news, US troops have been injured in a rocket attack in western Iraq, which was claimed by a group affiliated with Iran. An unspecified number of people are undergoing evacuation after a possible traumatic brain injury may have been caused to those American soldiers. A group called Islamic Resistance in Iraq have claimed responsibility for that attack, which is the latest in a series of strikes against US targets in recent weeks. It marks another escalation amid heightened tensions in the region following the outbreak of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister is rowing back on suggestions of a two-state solution with Palestine. Benjamin Netanyahu's appeared to double down on his position, posting to social media that he will not compromise on Israel's control over the entire area. That's despite a call on Friday with US President Joe Biden, where he appeared to be open to some two-state proposals. Here in the UK, the chief rabbi has criticised the use of the word genocide to describe that situation in Gaza. Writing in the Telegraph newspaper earlier today, Sir Ephraim Mervis says that campaigners are hijacking the word, trying to demonise Israel. He's described that as disinformation. He argues the country is fighting a defensive war that it did not want or ask for. Well, amid escalating global tensions, the government here in the UK says it will boost the Royal Navy's defences with some £405 million of funding. Missiles that have been used to defend ships in the Red Sea will be upgraded, making it the UK's most capable naval air defence system ever developed. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News earlier that Britain is taking a lead.
We're investing £288 billion over the next decade to make sure that we do